No, you don't! Enough! You'll not make a fool of me!
Out of all of the recent characters that we've discussed on this channel, there is one that seems to come up in every single conversation when it comes to the strongest mortal that Whis is talking about, when it comes to who the next villain might be. Everyone seems to believe that this character is somehow cooler. And to be completely honest with you, I can understand why people believe that Cooler is going to come back or might somehow become canon to Dragon Ball Super's canon, even though we recently made a video talking about how Dragon Ball canon is dead, but at least canon to what the Super anime is, or the Super manga. It just doesn't really make any sense, and in today's video we're going to discuss exactly why that is. Now, Cooler, if he does, or if he ever comes into the Dragon Ball universe in the form of Dragon Ball Super, he would basically be a Broly 2.0 case, where essentially Broly and Kale were basically based off of movie characters that were basically brought into the Super anime, and Cooler would basically be a movie character that comes in like Broly. The only difference is that Broly was a completely original character with an original father, so when Broly was made up for the movies it had kind of a different feel, but when you're making up Cooler and saying that he's directly related to one of the biggest villains, I'm sorry, not one of the biggest villains, the biggest villain in Dragon Ball history, I apologize for that blunder right there, you're gonna have to make it tie into the original Dragon Ball story. And to be completely honest with you, Cooler could kind of be canon to the Dragon Ball Z anime if you kind of overlook a couple of details from the original movie, because to be honest with you, the first Cooler movie, Cooler's Revenge, there was really no real problem with that movie being canon, except for the fact that Goku couldn't become a Super Saiyan immediately, and that one major detail was a contradiction, because when Goku came back to planet Earth, he had already known Super Saiyan, and he knew how to transform into a Super Saiyan at will. He never had any struggles going into it, so the fact that Goku would go through these struggles to become a Super Saiyan was a direct contradiction. So when we look at it like that, it just doesn't make actual sense for Cooler to be canon to the Dragon Ball anime, or shall I say the Dragon Ball Super anime, simply because of the fact that Cooler wanted revenge. That was the whole premise of Cooler's original character. He wanted to get revenge for Goku and obviously eventually Trunks for killing Frieza and King Cold, but the problem with that is that Frieza's alive now, so Cooler's whole revenge plot wouldn't really make any sense, so you'd have to basically rewrite his character in that way. And the other problem too is that, well, what the hell has Cooler been doing in the entire universe all this time? You see, the problem with this is that as you advance more into the future of Dragon Ball history, right? You know, because when things are closer to like the Namek arc and the Android arc, that's one thing, but when you have so many years that have passed, you start getting to the point where if Cooler is this intergalactic entity that has been controlling the universe in his smaller way, it's gonna be pretty hard to believe that he has no existence or nobody's ever felt his power level or anything like that. I mean, it's already kind of weird how, you know, Goku can sense Broly's energy level, but specifically, Broly is a different case when he's in his base form, because at least with Broly, Goku's identifying Broly as simply a different energy source instead of just simply being so strong that he could sense him directly. So I could kind of understand why Goku wouldn't be able to like understand where Broly is, but the fact that Cooler could just exist in the universe all this time, it makes no sense, because Frieza has come back during Resurrection of F. Frieza came back during, you know, the Android arc, or the pre-Android arc with like the Mecha Cooler arc. Then Frieza came back, you know, before the Torment of Power, and then obviously now Frieza's alive again, kind of running his whole empire and all that stuff. So when you analyze all of those different parts, you get to a point where it's like, Frieza has come back to life so many times and has been rebuilt so many times, and you mean to tell me that Cooler has had nothing to say about it at all throughout all this time? It just doesn't make any logical sense. And, you know, I know that this might sound kind of shocking to some of you guys, because back in the day, I was one of the people that was arguing that Cooler probably has a decent chance to come back, and the main reason is because of Dragon Ball Super Broly. If there was ever a point where you could introduce Cooler into the Dragon Ball universe, it was Dragon Ball Super Broly, because you were going back in time, you were retelling the story of Broly, you were retelling the story of Bardock, you were retelling Goku's origin story, you were also indirectly retelling Vegeta's origin story too. So when you're retelling all of those old stories, if you want to say that Frieza has another relative, then that was basically the perfect time to do it. Now, a lot of people also believe, that maybe Frieza was training with Cooler for those 10 years and this is how he got so strong, and maybe that's the moral that Whis is talking about, but it just doesn't make any sense, because even if you go throughout Dragon Ball history, it's never even fully confirmed if Cooler would ever be an ally to Frieza. I mean, yeah, you can rewrite their characters, but there is some tension between Frieza and Cooler if you go back and you rewatch the original movies. They weren't like buddy-buddy like pirates in space or something like that. Like, it wasn't a situation like that. So when you factor all of that in, and then when you also factor in that King Cold is also dead, that's one of the biggest parts about all of this, because King Cold is dead. So the King Cold is dead, which basically means that Frieza is basically the heir to his throne. Cooler into this storyline now and just kind of force his existence into the Dragon Ball universe. To be completely honest with you guys, this will be one of the biggest ass pulls in the history of Dragon Ball. Now, that's a big statement, because we've seen a case with Tarbell when we look at Yosun Goku and his friends return, and Tarbell does technically exist within Super's canon because he was mentioned in the Battle of Gods movie and he was mentioned in Dragon Ball Super Broly, so Tarbell does exist. Where is he? We don't know, but Tarbell does exist in Dragon Ball Super's universe. And obviously, Tights is now canon to Jocko the Galactic Patrolman and the Dragon Ball Super anime when we saw that episode where Bulma was talking to her on the phone. So when we factor in that Tarbell and, Tights are canon, you get to a point where it's like, Dragon Ball is willing to just create random relatives out of thin air and then just say they exist. Because you could also kind of say that to Goku for some extent, even going all the way back to what we would call in the anime Dragon Ball Z, even though it was all originally the Dragon Ball manga. Raditz was originally kind of an asshole too, because, at the time, I mean, we look at Raditz as the brother of Goku now, but we have to remember that at the time that Raditz showed up, he was just a random sibling that just started to exist within the Dragon Ball universe. So, it's not impossible for Cooler to come back. But in order to tie Cooler into the grassroots of the storyline, it just seems like it's just not likely, guys. I mean, basically, Cooler has done everything that Frieza was supposed to do in the movies, where you had like an original Cooler that got his body destroyed, then he was rebuilt as like Mecha Cooler or Metal Cooler versus Mecha Frieza. I mean, Cooler was basically just meant to be a Frieza clone for the movies. And if you were to tie him into the main story, you're gonna have to do a lot of creativity with the writing, or you do a lot of piss poor stuff with the writing, and then just expect the fans to just accept it for what it is, because Dragon Ball fans always just accept what they're told. The only way that it really honestly makes sense for Cooler to simply exist in the universe is if Dragon Ball can somehow just find a very, very, very realistic way to explain how in the world has he never been noticed, he's never been mentioned, he's never done anything for all of these years, guys. Because we gotta factor in how much time has passed. Like, how do you explain how he's just not been doing anything? Or you just say he's just been off doing his own thing, and he found a way to suppress his power level or something like that. And even then, like, does Cooler train himself the way that Frieza does? I mean, if you want to do a Cooler villain lineup, I do think it would be a cool idea, because if you have Cooler and Frieza, and then Goku and Vegeta have to take them down, that would be a really awesome storyline where it's like, now you have to deal with two major villains. That would be interesting. The writing would have to be, the writing would have to move mountains in order to make that work, but it's not impossible. It just doesn't seem likely, guys. I'm sorry. This just doesn't seem likely, and ultimately it just seems like it's one of those things where we as Dragon Ball fans want this to happen because we always wanted to see Cooler canonized, but you just have to factor in that so much time has passed that you'd really have to do a lot of that. But because Frieza had discovered that hyperbolic time chamber-like area, you could always find a way to just make Cooler strong enough to compete with their characters by saying, hey, what if Cooler trained with Frieza for all these years and somehow he's just able to compete against our characters now? I mean, they did the same thing with Broly. Power scaling isn't the issue. The issue is, how do you write him into the story in a way that it actually makes sense? But if Dragon Ball doesn't want to make sense the way that it has in the past, then it doesn't matter.